There's a huge difference between being loved and being needed, between being remembered out of convenience and being missed by absence. When you are always there, like a forgotten book on the shelf, few people really read you in depth. But when you leave, even if in silence, something strange happens. The emptiness you leave behind begins to speak louder than any forced presence. People start to wonder why you didn't show up, why you didn't respond, why that constant energy, that hand always outstretched, suddenly disappeared. And that's when the tables turn, because your absence begins to hurt more than your presence alleviated. And that's when value is born, not in insistence, but in calculated scarcity, not in desperation, but in strategic absence. You become a mystery that can no longer be ignored. But this absence is not about pride. It's about redemption, a return to yourself. Because every time you said yes when you meant no, a part of you died a little. And now you're picking up the fragments, one by one, relearning to listen to yourself in the silence that others try to fill with demands. And in this process, you discover that true strength is not in always being present. It is knowing when to leave, when not to answer, when to protect your peace as if it were a temple. Because it is. A temple where time bends, where masks fall, and where the truth reveals itself in layers. You do not disappear out of contempt. You disappear out of self-love. And then, slowly, your energy changes. You start to walk differently, look differently, respond differently. Something in you becomes unattainable. Not out of arrogance, but out of depth. What was once neediness becomes criteria. What was once urgency becomes presence. You no longer need to be the first to run to save anyone, because you understand that many times by saving yourself first, you show others the way. And it is in this paradox, where you retreat to find yourself, that doors begin to open, by themselves, effortlessly. As if the universe were waiting for this exact moment to move everything in your favor. But there is one detail that no one told you, and that is what we're going to talk about next. What few people realize is that true transformation is not in physical absence, but in emotional absence, the kind that reveals what until then was hidden under the routine of infinite availability. When you stop being always available, you begin to break the invisible chains that bind you to the cycle of being there for others, and you forget to be there for yourself. It is a silent abyss that is frightening, because the fear of abandonment is confused with the fear of finding yourself again. And it is in this encounter with yourself, in this frightening emptiness, that a kind of paradoxical rebirth emerges. Because only those who lose themselves can find themselves. Only those who withdraw know where they stand. Only those who keep quiet hear what no one else heard. But the deepest paradox is in what happens next. When you stop feeding other people's expectations, the space that is left becomes a mirror, and the reflection you see can be too painful to continue ignoring. You begin to realize where you are fooling yourself, who is using you, who truly loved you, and who just got used to your constant presence. Each absence of yours becomes a light that illuminates the darkness of toxic relationships, drained energy and memories trapped in an always available that was never yours. And the feeling that remains is not only of loss, but of liberation. As if for the first time, you are breathing without shackles, even if your chest hurts. So, silence becomes a manifesto, and absence becomes power. Selective presence becomes an invisible weapon, capable of rewriting stories, recalibrating connections, and redefining values. You are no longer the supporting actor who runs after others, but the protagonist who chooses the stage and the moment to appear. But this choice has a price that few want to pay. The discomfort of emptiness, the discomfort of silence, and the confrontation with their own shadows. It is a journey where time seems to stop, but which, in fact, accelerates everything that is to come. Because when you stop being always available, the world doesn't just change around you, it bends to your new rhythm. And that rhythm is the beat of power that no one else can take away from you. This profound change does not happen on easy days, nor in moments of calm. It is born in the fire of doubts that burn inside, in the restlessness that corrodes the fragile certainties that you built to protect yourself. When you stop being always available, the world around you tries to pull you back, with voices, demands, false promises, and even smiles that hide chains. It is a silent war between what you were and what you can become, between the need to please and the urgency to preserve yourself. Every no that you dare to say resonates like a rupture that echoes in every corner of your life, knocking down castles of habits, bonds, and beliefs. But it is in this collapse that something rare happens, a pure space, a fertile void where your forgotten essence begins to pulse with unprecedented strength. You feel a pull to go back, to be the person who is always there, but an internal voice, almost inaudible, tells you to resist. She speaks in symbols, in subtle signs that only you can decipher. And this voice is your new compass, the one that points away from endless demands towards your own sanctuary. Because being always available is a golden prison, beautiful for those who observe, suffocating for those who live it. And only those who decide to break this invisible chain can experience the true meaning of time. No longer as something that is lost, but as something that is conquered, that is owned with property. At that moment, your absence becomes a silent cry that echoes in the deepest hearts, awakening a respect that constant presence could never generate. However, what no one told you is that this choice creates a cruel and beautiful paradox. You become desired and feared in equal measure. Presence and absence cease to be opposites and become inseparable allies in the art of transformation. You become an enigma, a rare piece whose value cannot be measured by frequency, but by intensity. And this intensity only arises when you stop giving yourself to those who do not deserve it and start dedicating yourself to those who really matter, yourself. A process that is not linear, but circular, where the end of a painful availability is the beginning of a wild, profound, overwhelming freedom. A secret that time whispers, but that only the brave dare to hear. This wild freedom, however, is an unknown and frightening territory, a desert where old certainties wither and silence screams louder than any words. You may even try to escape this empty space, but it haunts you because it is there that the answers you never had begin to reveal themselves, disguised as questions. The constant absence that you impose becomes a powerful lens, revealing details that previously went unnoticed. The invisible fatigue, the worn-out relationships, the very shadow that you ignored with the promise of always being there. It is an inevitable confrontation, a broken mirror that no longer allows for deception, and where each fragment reflects a piece of your elusive soul thirsting for truth. You find yourself naked, vulnerable, but strangely more whole than you have ever been. And when this vulnerability arises, something new begins to blossom. The awareness of your own strength, but not that forged by constant presence or the approval of others, but rather a silent strength, which feeds on retreat and self-respect. It is a power that slips from your grasp, not because you lose it, but because it transforms itself, ceasing to be an external search and becoming an internal discovery. You realize that being available at all times is a prison disguised as generosity, and that true generosity begins when you first become the master of your time and your emotions. This awakening is a delicate dance between light and shadow, between the fear of losing and the desire to gain something that could never be bought or stolen. But what the universe does not clearly say is that on this path of rupture, you will not find a map or a guide. You will get lost in labyrinths of silence, go through dense nights, and feel the emptiness that frightens. Because it is precisely in this emptiness that lies the transformation that everyone seeks, but few have the courage to face. The lack of availability is, therefore, a portal, a subtle passage between what you were and what you can become, an invisible frontier that only those who dare to cross experience. And the question that echoes within you, as deep as silence itself, is the one that will hold your attention until the very last moment. What are you willing to leave behind to finally find yourself? This journey through silence and absence brings with it an unquenchable restlessness, a feeling that the world keeps turning without you, while something inside you begins to rearrange itself in secret. Constant availability was like an anchor that tied your essence to a version of yourself created to please, serve, respond, but that no longer fits your skin. And when this anchor is released, the boat rocks, the sea becomes agitated, and you realize that sailing alone at your own pace is more lonely and frightening than you imagined. However, it is precisely in this uncertain balance that the hidden magic of your transformation is revealed, where absence is not abandonment, but a summons to rediscover your inner power, forgotten under the external demands that previously dictated your time and energy. You feel this call as a whisper, a pulse that cuts through deep layers of fear and desire, and that, therefore, generates an almost paralyzing conflict between wanting to return to the known and moving forward towards the mysterious. Because not being available also means refusing the role that the world insisted on giving you, that of eternal supporting actor to other people's expectations. It means assuming authorship of your own story, even if that means losing glances, friendships, certainties that seemed solid but were actually sandcastles. And this loss hurts, shakes your roots, destabilizes the ground beneath your feet. But it is this pain that opens the door to genuine growth, that deep rupture that everyone desires, but few can bear. So, while the world calls out to you with every notification, with every subtle demand, with every required presence, you find yourself on the threshold between chaos and control, between weakness and strength that arises from the conscious decision to choose who and when to give yourself. It is an invisible game, where absence turns into power, where silence is not emptiness, but a secret language that only the truly initiated understand. And in the midst of this internal battle, the question that won't go away arises: is being always available actually the biggest obstacle to the life you want to manifest? The moment you decide to turn off the lights to the world, a dense darkness full of possibilities sets in, a fertile ground where the invisible begins to reveal itself. This absence that once seemed like abandonment now turns into a veil that covers the spectacle of distractions, exposing the depths of your true existence. You realize that, deep down, always being available was a subtle way of hiding, of avoiding confrontation with your own emptiness, with the inner voices that cried out for attention and healing. This conscious renunciation of eternal care is not a retreat, but the audacious gesture of someone who dares to dig into the depths of their own being, facing ghosts that only appear when the lights go out. But this dive into absence is not a free fall. It is a spiral that slowly turns, pulling you to the center of your essence where time loses meaning and masks fall. The paradox is cruel. You need to step away to find yourself, be silent to listen, disappear to emerge with new strength. And in this game of presence and absence, what seemed like a renunciation becomes an ancestral strategy, a hidden code that Napoleon Hill whispers between the lines. Real power does not lie in being available to everything and everyone, but in choosing when and to whom your time and energy will be truly sacred. This choice, however, is not made on the surface of the mind, but in the depths of feeling where desires, fears, and the urgent need to redefine who you are confront each other. Thus, your internal universe becomes a minefield of doubts and discoveries, where each step is a rupture and each silence a silent victory. You find yourself stripped of superficial certainties, navigating between the strength of control and the fragility of surrender, between the anxiety of lack and the relief of conquered space. And while the world outside calls for your incessant attention, the question that will haunt your journey grows within you. Could it be that the secret to transforming everything begins precisely the moment you decide to stop being available? This enigma cannot be solved with easy answers. It requires courage to continue, even when the path seems like a maze with no exit. As you step away from the constant noise You realize that you are not only creating external space, but also triggering a silent revolution within yourself. The act of not being available ceases to be a simple choice and becomes a rebellion against the invisible programming that has conditioned your life to a permanent state of waiting. This state, once comfortable in its apparent security, begins to reveal its true face, that of a gilded prison, where freedom is just an illusion that you have accepted as truth. And when you break out of this prison, you feel the weight of loneliness, but also the unique taste of autonomy, a taste that no one can take away, not even the insistent voices of the outside world. But this liberation does not come without a price, because each absence creates deep echoes, echoes that reverberate in the void you leave behind and in the expectations you no longer meet. It is as if the universe is testing your resolve, sending you signals, doubts, and temptations so that you can once again hide behind constant availability. It's a cruel game where your strength is proven not by the number of times you show up, but by your ability to sustain the silence you've chosen. In this invisible dance, you understand that true presence is measured not by the noise you make, but by the silent impact you leave on those who really matter. And this shakes up all your certainties about how to live and relate. At the center of this battle, an almost torturous question arises. Is being always available an act of love or fear? And what if what you've always sought in the other person actually needs to be found within yourself? As this doubt grows, the feeling that something essential is slipping away becomes unbearable, fueling a tension that will only be resolved at the end of this journey. You realize that to unravel this mystery, it's not enough to just physically distance yourself. You need to go further, delve deep into the invisible layers of the mind and heart, where the true secrets of personal power and transformation lie hidden. In the silence you impose on the world, an invisible storm begins to form within you. Not the kind that explodes and screams, but the kind that slowly erodes the certainties and deconstructs the narratives you have nurtured for so long. Being unavailable becomes an act of solitary courage, where fear and desire intertwine like whispering serpents, questioning every step, every hesitation. You feel like something inside you is being disconnected, an old frequency that maintained the vicious cycle of emotional dependence and other people's approval. It's as if a door has closed behind you, and the key to opening a new life is hidden precisely in the absence you have now chosen. But it is in the cracks of this silence that the real ghosts appear. Not the ones that scare, but the ones that reveal. The doubts you avoided, the repressed desires, the need for control that camouflaged the deepest fragility. The paradox is cruel. When you try to free yourself from availability, you find yourself more exposed than ever, vulnerable to yourself and the emptiness that insists on manifesting itself. And it is precisely there that the invisible turning point lies, a hidden threshold between the old self that is wearing itself out and the new self that does not yet know who it is, but already senses the magnitude of the transformation that is about to happen. This tension, this unnamed urgency, creates an internal loop where time seems to expand and compress at the same time, keeping you trapped between the desire to escape and the need to remain. And it is at this emotional crossroads that the key to everything begins to shine, a subtle, almost imperceptible light, but which carries the weight of a truth capable of changing the course of your life. It is at this point that Napoleon Hill leaves us with the ultimate provocation, an invitation to discover that the secret of change is not outside, but in the delicate balance between being and not being, between surrender and refusal. This journey will only end when you are willing to face what remains hidden in your own reflection. And then, in the heavy silence that you build, the unexpected emerges, an inner voice that seemed dormant, but now cries out in whispers, revealing that true availability is not the one you have given to others, but the one you grant to yourself. It is at this point that the masks begin to fall, not all at once, but in fragments, like a puzzle that challenges your perception of who you really are. The forced absence becomes a mirror, reflecting not only the loneliness, but the vastness that existed beyond the reach of your usual distractions. And this vastness is both a promise and a warning. Being unavailable can be the first step to finding a freedom that is frightening because it knows no limits. However, there is a hidden weight in this separation, a shadow that remains silent, invisible, fed by the memories that insist on resurfacing when least expected. It is the echo of the voices you failed to hear, of the moments you missed, of the opportunities that seemingly slipped away while you chose not to respond. But are these losses real, or just a fabric of illusions woven by a mind that fears change? The line between what has been abandoned and what has been gained becomes as thin as a spider's thread, and you find yourself walking along it, between fear and hope, between the comfort of the old prison and the uncertainty of the new freedom. And in the middle of this crossing, a brutal paradox emerges: the desperate desire to control the control that you have lost. Being unavailable, deep down, is an act of power that defies all the rules you knew, because there is nothing more terrifying than giving up control and accepting that life has its own rhythm. Napoleon Hill suggests that true change begins exactly at this point of surrender, where you stop being the piece on the board and become the invisible player who moves the pieces in silence. But this revelation will not come easily, because to achieve it you must face the abyss that lives in the center of your being, an abyss that only reveals itself to those who dare to stop being always available. In the vacuum you create by withdrawing from the reach of others, something unexpected begins to manifest, a quiet restlessness that throbs beneath your skin, like an ancient whisper trying to break through to the surface of your consciousness. This absence is not a void, but an open wound that burns with unspoken questions. What do you really lose when you are absent? And more importantly, what do you gain when the world realizes it can no longer reach you at any given moment? Each moment of silence echoes like a primal drum, marking the rhythm of a transformation that is both frightening and inevitable. You begin to realize that your value, once measured by your constant presence, is now reconfigured in a space between being and not being, a sacred territory where quiet power begins to flourish. But the universe does not tolerate permanent emptiness, and that is when internal tensions become more intense. The fear of being forgotten, the anguish of loneliness, the doubt that whispers, is it worth it to distance yourself from everything and everyone? Remaining unavailable is a gesture of rebellion against the natural flow of social expectations, a silent declaration that defies the logic of always being there for others. And this rebellion opens the door to an invisible battle, where you confront not only others, but the very chains that have kept you a prisoner of always being available. Napoleon Hill points to this moment as the crossroads of the soul, where the discomfort of detachment is the prelude to the discovery of an inner power that few dare to access. And it is precisely at this threshold that the mystery deepens, because ceasing to be always available is not just a change in behavior, but a rite of passage that reveals hidden layers of your being. It is a dive into the depths where true power resides, the kind that is not given as an offering, but is conquered through silent resistance, through mastering one's own energy. The tension that seems to tear you apart is actually the bridge to a new state of consciousness, where freedom is no longer a distant concept, but a visceral experience. And as you hear these words, something inside you already knows that this journey is just beginning, that the secret to transformation lies hidden between the lines of what you have not yet dared to let go. The feeling of always being available, like a flame that never goes out, turns out to be an invisible trap that slowly consumes your essence, without you noticing the silent wear and tear behind the apparently noble gesture. Each quick response, each message answered at the exact moment, becomes a chain that binds you, a thin thread that limits the space where your true strength could blossom. It is at this point that the internal tension intensifies, the contradiction between the deep desire to be needed and the urgent impulse to free yourself from this hidden servitude. The constant availability, which seemed to be synonymous with relevance, turns into a shadow that obscures your shine, and you find yourself lost in the labyrinth of your own sacrifice. Meanwhile, a paradox sets in. Absence, which should be a reason for loss, begins to become a fertile field where transformation silently germinates. But this change is not gentle. It is an electric shock that runs through the nerves of your identity, provoking reactions that can fuse and awaken at the same time. Napoleon Hill whispers to us that true power lies not in giving in to the world's incessant demands, but in the courage to set limits, to make yourself invisible to the external chaos, and, finally, to hear what your silence has to say. The enigma lies precisely there, in the delicate balance between being seen and being felt, between physical presence and the invisible force that sustains everything you truly wish to manifest. And it is in this play of light and shadow that the mystery deepens, because when you stop being always available, you begin to realize that you are not simply denying something external, but confronting the inner voices that have always dictated who you should be. It is a dance with the unknown, a silent duel between the old version of yourself and the latent potential that struggles to emerge. Each choice not to respond, not to give in, reverberates like a pulse in the heart of your essence, creating an invisible magnetic field that attracts unexpected forces. And this mysterious attraction is what will trigger true change, the one that you do not yet understand, but that is engraved in the deepest fibers of your being. In the silence you impose on the world, something subtle yet revolutionary begins to stir in the shadows of your own being. It is not an empty silence, but a pause charged with meaning, like the sigh between two beats that reveals the secret cadence of life. What was once a constant echo of external demands now becomes a sacred space where your true self can emerge, unmasked and untethered. This pause is an invitation to dive into the depths of an existence that has never been taught, where strength lies not in responding, but in choosing when and how to reveal yourself. And this choice, as simple as it may seem, sets off invisible ripples that cross the barriers of time and consciousness. But this transformation is a puzzle that defies the logic of the ordinary mind, for it demands that you embrace the uncertainty, discomfort, and loneliness that come with letting go of ceaseless availability. It is in this nebulous terrain that the key to a new power lies, one that cannot be achieved through haste or the approval of others, but only through the patience to become whole within yourself. Napoleon Hill warns us that true freedom comes from the ability to refuse the constant invitation to be a passive spectator of other people's lives and to start writing your own script. The challenge is to accept that real value has never been and always being within reach, but in being an enigma that the world wants to unravel. As you feel this tension pulsing inside your chest, like an irregular beat that challenges stability, the realization arises that your absence is not a loss, but a call, a coded message that resonates in the minds of those around you, awakening something latent and forgotten. This message, loaded with mystery, suggests that the power of being lies precisely in the ability to create spaces between moments, in the silence between words, in the absence that transforms into an invisible presence. And it is on this threshold between having and not having, between responding and remaining silent, that everything begins to change. What is about to happen exceeds expectations and breaks with the old stories you have told yourself, a silent revolution that will turn your world upside down without you even realizing the exact moment it began. There is something almost sacred about choosing not to be always available, as if you are stepping through an invisible portal where time bends and hidden truths begin to reveal themselves in fragments. This decision, which seems simple on the surface, carries the force of a silent earthquake that shakes the foundations of your being. Imagine a magnetic field where absence creates attraction and distance creates connection, where not responding is not a refusal, but rather a gesture of ancient power, which rescues the dignity forgotten in the rush of daily demands. The paradox you are about to unravel is this: the more you withdraw, the stronger and more present you become. But the price of this transformation still echoes in the shadows of your fear. Within this invisible web, old certainties begin to dissolve like fine sand between fingers, leaving space for a new order to emerge. Those who are always available become a fragment lost in the whirlwind of others, while those who learn to inhabit their own absence draw invisible lines that guide destiny. But this power is not surrendered without a fight. It calls for confrontation with the inner ghosts that whisper doubts, demands, and guilt. It is in this silent clash that tension grows, like a stretched rope between the known and the unknown, and the question burns in the skin. Are you willing to pay the price of no longer being what everyone expects? The answer is still hidden in the veil of mystery, waiting to be unveiled. And while this internal battle unfolds, the universe seems to conspire silently, aligning forces that only attentive eyes can perceive. Each choice to walk away, each moment in which you decide not to be there, creates a reverberation that propagates beyond time and space, connecting you to a greater, inexplicable, and transformative energy. This energy does not speak loudly, but whispers ancient secrets that only those who dare to abandon their constant availability can hear. It is as if, by closing the door to the external world, you are opening a portal inward to a realm where true change resides, the one that alters not only what you see, but who you are deep within yourself. And now, after everything you have felt, you realize that it was not about answering messages, being present or pleasing. It never was. It was about recovering what you gave away without realizing it. Your energy, your sovereignty, your frequency. When you stop being always available, the world does not abandon you. It recognizes you. Opportunities do not disappear. They wait for you to occupy your throne. Absence becomes an amplified presence. Silence becomes an internal cry for clarity. Your strategic absence becomes the echo of your true presence. You're no longer the one who runs to be accepted. Now, you walk with those who are able to wait for your vibration. Because those who truly have value never need to prove themselves. Your scarcity is your signature. And in this new place where few have the courage to enter, everything changes. Because finally, you have come back to yourself. And the world, for the first time, has realized who you really are.